Night fell over home like a heavy lid. Street lamps turned on. Windows glowed. People finished work and walked home. The city made its usual small sounds. Then, suddenly, every channel carried the same voice. It was not a song. It was not a siren. The voice spoke in clear words, "We hear something. Worse than silence." The words were calm. The voice did not shout. It did not demand. It only said the sentence once, then stopped. For a long moment nothing moved. Phones sat on tables. Televisions kept their last images. People looked at screens and did not speak. The sentence repeated itself in the head of anyone who heard it. Worse than silence. The words felt wrong, like a cold wind that came from inside the house. In a small kitchen near the river, Lily held her sleeping daughter. The radio on the counter gave the message and then a thin hiss. Lily set the child down gently. She stood at the window and watched the street. Dogs stopped barking. A bus rolled by and the driver did not cough at the stop. Lily had worked on ships for years. She listened to machines. That night, the city's machines sounded different. The hum of the towers was flat. Her own breath felt loud. The government called an emergency meeting. The news called for calm. The observatories checked every sensor. The recordings showed nothing that fit known signals. The voice had no origin on the maps. It left no trace. It was a single clear statement. Scientists played the recording again and again. The pattern in the silence between words made some of them frown. The pauses were not random. They looked like breathing. Around the city small things began to shift. Clocks lost seconds. Compasses spun for a while and then steadied. Pets moved in circles and refused to go out. A violinist in the square stopped mid-note and could not begin again. People who were out late hurried home as if the night itself had teeth. The first ship left the port at dawn. It carried emergency teams and listening gear. They were to follow any sign the signal might give. The ship did not return. Lily was called to the capital. She did not think of herself as a hero. She had fixed pumps and engines and old radios. But the people in the meeting needed someone who could hear the small things. Arjun, the man who led the listening group, watched her carefully. He had a calm face and a tired mouth. He handed Lily a pair of old headphones and said, "Listen." They fed the broadcast into machines that could catch the smallest hiss. Lily closed her eyes and listened like she had listened to broken valves and tired motors. The voice was simple. The spaces inside it were not empty. They held a rhythm that reminded her of a sleeping engine, slow, regular, breathing. A scientist said softly, "It is like a living thing." As days passed, towns far from home reported similar words. Sometimes the message changed. A fragment would say a name. In a village near the lake a child's name appeared in the static of a radio. The family found the child slow to answer, slow to smile. A fisherman forgot the song he sang to pass time. People began to call the strange message the naming. News feeds filled with short reports. One town lost all its radios for a day. Another saw its clock stop for an hour. Someone uploaded a blurry video of a pale blink in the sky. People argued online. Some laughed. Others argued the message was a prank. Many simply felt the wrongness in their rooms. The listening group moved quickly. They built a small lab in an old train depot. Machines lined the walls. Screens showed sound as bright lines. The team worked in shifts. Lily slept little. She wrote notes on small scraps and taped them to her jacket. Her handwriting was quick and tight. She thought of the last ship that left. She thought of the sailor faces she knew. She feared the void where the ship went. On the third night after the broadcast, the machines picked up a second fragment. It was softer this time. The voice said one word and stretched it like a small rope of sound. Lily felt the hair on her arm rise. The word was a human name. Not a public name. Not the name of a leader or hero. It was a name that belonged to a family. When Arjun read the name aloud, the room fell quiet. Lalia's stomach turned. The name was her mother's name. No one understood how the signal had learned that name. No one knew why it chose certain names and not others. Scientists argued about how a pattern of silence could carry meaning. The city outside the depot moved as if under a low cloud. People spoke in softer voices. They put blankets over radios as if the machines might catch cold. Lali touched the scrap of paper in her jacket where she had written her mother's face in quick lines. She had not told anyone the name. She had not even thought it aloud for years. Now the name sat in the lab like a key in a locked door. The team huddled and planned. They would look to the place where the first ship had vanished. They would search for signs. They would listen harder. At the window the night was thin and sharp. Stars looked far away and small. Far beyond the city a single light blinked once and went out. No one could say why it had blinked. Lali felt the world tilt by a degree she could not name. The broadcast had broken the night. It had put a new word between people worse than silence. They had to learn what it meant before more names were taken, or before the world learned a new and quieter kind of fear. They sailed out at dawn with a thin fog on the water. The ship cut through the gray like a knife through cloth. Lali stood on the deck with her hands on the rail. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. The crew moved quiet and quick. None of them spoke louder than a whisper. Rumors had made their voices small. Arjun watched the screens in the small cabin. His face stayed calm, but his eyes were tired. He tapped the glass of a monitor and pointed to a line. "Listen," he said softly. The ship's speakers were low. The team had turned down every sound that was not needed. Machines hummed like distant bees. They reached the coordinates where the first ship had gone. The sea was empty like a glass. Their instruments found a relay buoy half buried in seaweed and salt. The buoy should have held a pulse of returning ship data. Instead it sent a soft lullaby. The tune had no words anyone in the room knew. It rose and fell like waves. Lali felt the song in her chest like a small stone. One of the young technicians, Mara, leaned close to the recorder. Her fingers moved over keys like someone touching a sleeping thing. She slowed the sound. The lullaby matched a heartbeat. When she matched it to the ship's log, the numbers lined up. The pattern was not random. It fit a human rhythm. They brought the buoy aboard. Its glass was clean and smooth, as if washed by water that never gets dirty. No marks of a hull. No signs of scraping. The metal tasted old and new at once. Lali ran her hand along the seam. She could not find where the inside ended and the world began. Back in the lab, the team played the lullaby at different speeds. Each time it made the room bend a little. Some of the crew felt dizzy. A man named Salim sat down hard and put his head in his hands. His eyes were bright and raw. He said a name he had never said aloud, the name of a fishing port he had not visited since he was a boy. He cried without sound. The ship's log showed a small change in the crew the longer they listened. People blinked more. Their talk came in slow pieces. One crew member, a quiet woman named Noor, began to forget small things. She left her mug by the rail and could not remember why she had gone outside. She looked at the mug like it might be someone else's. Arjun ordered them to seal the buoy and send a sample back to the city lab. He wanted more eyes and more ears on the sound. The team sent a packet of data by coded burst. The city replied that the packet arrived damaged. The message said only, "Do not let it name the whole ship." That night the crew took turns at watch. Lali sat with Mara and listened to old songs on quiet repeat. The lullaby returned like a small animal at the door. In the dark, a small thing moved across the deck, a gull or a shadow, and then it was gone. The air felt thin. When they dove for the buoy's deeper systems, a diver slipped below the hull. He wore a suit that hummed with life. He reached the relay and tried to pry open a panel. The water pressed at his ears. The lights in his mask showed him a soft, shaped shadow moving far away. His lungs tightened. When he came up he was not quite the same. He spoke slowly and looked at the sky like a man who had seen a far shore. He kept saying, "They asked me why we sing." He would not answer more. News from home made the team anxious. Cities had started to quiet music halls. People kept their radios wrapped in cloth. Local markets grew tense. A fight over a radio close to the capital turned into a small riot. Fear ran like spill oil. The government tried to calm people, but people had begun to listen to their rooms as if words might slip away. On the ship, Mara found a small line in the buoy's data that matched old war songs recorded in the archives. The rhythm was similar to songs soldiers had used to march in fleets long ago. Lily thought of those old recordings: harsh voices, heavy feet, a cadence that made people move together. The lullaby carried that same memory, but it was softer, as if the old song had learned to whisper. They played the war rhythm against the lullaby and watched the screens. The lines tangled. A map of pauses and beats grew on the monitor. The pattern matched towns on the coast and junctures inland where speech had become thin. The ship's analyst, Quiet Jiro, pointed to the map and said nothing. The map looked like a web that reached into the places where silence had sharpened. A small alarm blinked on the console. The ship's long recording device had captured a section of sound that made no sense. It was not silence, not exactly. It was a hollow so deep that the machine could not turn it into numbers. The recorder showed blank where sound should be. The crew stared at the blank and felt a pressure in their ears. Arjun ordered the ship to return to a safe orbit and to send the file to the city. They sent it in pieces. The first pieces arrived with errors. The experts in the capital could not recover the missing sound. They could only stare at the blank and argue about whether a hole could be a thing. Lily slept badly. In her dream she heard the lullaby again, and then a soft voice said a name she knew from childhood. She woke with her hand on her chest. The ship rolled a little. Somewhere below the deck, a machine ticked and then stopped for a single beat longer than it should have. In the morning the sea lay like metal. The city sent a short message: keep the buoy sealed. Do not play the recording aloud. The message ended with a single line: we must learn where it learned human names. Lily pinned a small scrap of paper to her jacket. On it she had written a child's rhyme that her mother used to sing. She did not trust her memory. The paper felt heavy, like something held against a wind. The team gathered to plan their next move. They would go to the places the map showed, where the pauses met old songs. They would dig into archives and into old hulls. They would follow the web. As the ship turned toward home, a slow shadow passed over the sun. For a moment the deck lost light and the crew felt the world tilt. The recorder, still running, caught only the blank, a hole in sound so deep that even the best machines could not say what lay inside. The file closed on the screen like a door. The ship sailed on, and everyone who heard the blank felt it in their chest, as if a piece of the world had moved out of reach. The old song rose from the files like a ghost. Lily stood close to the screen. The sound was dry and low. It had the slow beat of feet on metal. It had the rough voice of people who had to move together. It felt like wind through an empty hull. Arjun put his hand on the console. He kept his voice small. This is an old fleet cadence, he said. People used it to march. They used it to hold fear steady. The room smelled of coffee and cold metal. The machines showed the song as spikes and gaps. The gaps matched the lullaby they had taken from the buoy. Lily listened until the song made her teeth buzz. The song was not only rhythm. It carried a memory. When the team matched the song to old archives, a picture opened in their minds. It was a dark day long ago. Ships burned. Men and women called names and lost them. The song held the hush after the shouting. It held the weight of things that were gone. The team watched the map on the screen. The song's beats matched places where words had thinned. Small towns. Ferry crossings. Rooms where clocks stopped for an hour. The pattern looked like a hand that had touched many faces. Jiro tapped a point on the map and did not speak. The lines made a net from coast to coast. They tried a test. Mara built a small speaker and fed the old cadence into it. She set the volume low. She added a tiny, human sound they had not used before, a short, sharp laugh cut in the middle of a line. The laugh was nothing like the laugh of a festival. It was small and quick, it broke the rhythm in one place. They sent the sound into the air through safe transmitters. People nearby heard only a whisper. For a few hours the web of silence loosened. A baker in a village hummed as he kneaded dough. A child laughed and did not stop. The town felt like itself again. Lily cried once and wiped her face with the back of her hand. They had done something real. Then the thing answered. The reply came as a voice on the old frequency. It was not angry. It sounded amused. It said, in a tone that slid like water, "You sang for yourself. Now listen." The room chilled. The team felt that the voice had looked into the lab and smiled at them. After the reply, the world changed again. Places that had sung fell quiet fast. 2 children in that village went to sleep and did not wake. Their beds were warm in the morning, but their names were gone from small mouths. The town kept singing for several days, but a hole had opened in the joy. People spoke less of the lost children. The song that had helped had also shown the thing how humans held love. Guilt landed on the team like a weight. Arjun closed his eyes. He had wanted to push back the hush. Now he saw that pushing could cost more than silence. Lily could not stop thinking about the children. She sat with her scrap of paper and traced the rhyme her mother had taught her. She whispered the words once and felt them tighten in her chest. The science people argued. Some said the reply proved the thing was learning from them. It borrowed pieces of human sound and used them as hooks. Others thought the thing was not cruel. It was curious. It collected memory the way a child collects shells. But the shells it took were names and songs and faces. Noor's memory slipped faster than others. She forgot the route to the lab and stood at a corner and stared for a long time. Salim stopped whistling in the mess. He watched his hands and did not know the shape of his thumb. Mara grew pale and said that sometimes she heard the old song under her pillow. Jiro kept the map open and drew lines until his pen stopped. They found another record in the buoy data. It was older than the war songs. It was a chant used to calm children on ships before storms. The chant had been sung in many tongues. The buoy had kept a sample. When they played it in slow motion, the chant bent and made pictures on the screen. The pictures were not of ships. They were of faces in rows, saved in a pattern the machines could not name. Arjun made a plan that fit on one sheet of paper. They would not try to fight the listener with loud sound. They would try to confuse it. They would not give it one clear rhythm to learn from. They would feed it broken things, coughs, half-sung lines, stuttering counts. They would try to teach communities to hold names together, to say them in groups, so the listener could not take a single voice without the rest holding it tight. The city sent warnings. Do not sing alone. Do not play old recordings. Lock radios. Yet people could not stop. A schoolteacher in the east read a list of names in the market. Her voice shook and then steadied. Men and women joined. The voice of one small woman grew into a choir. The listener answered with a low sound that made windows hum. That night the lab's monitors showed a new pattern. The thing had begun to place pieces of memory into its own calls. It used the names to make sounds that were almost human. Sometimes the sounds were too perfect. They came from places where no human voice should be. A hollow ship chimed with laughter that had no owner. Lily stepped outside the depot and looked up. The stars were hard and clear. She thought about the old songs and the lost children and the weight of names. In her pocket her scrap of paper was warm from her hand. She folded it and put it back. She felt a strange hope and a cold fear in the same breath. In the lab a machine beeped once. A new file opened on the screen. The file had no sound. It had a chart of blankness and a single note in the corner. The note read, simply, "Listen." The team gathered close. Whoever had taught the listener had sent a message back through it. The note was an answer and a promise. Arjun looked at Lily. He said nothing. She understood without words. They were no longer only listeners. They had become part of the thing's long memory. They had to choose what to teach it next. They learned one hard thing: the listener learned fast. The team sat in the depot and watched how it copied each sound they offered. It did not sound like a machine. It copied with small errors that made the skin crawl. A laugh became a thin echo. A song became a broken ribbon. The copies were wrong in tiny ways that made people remember things they had not lived. At first the idea of using laughter felt brave and simple. People needed to feel less afraid. The team made a plan that sounded like a child's trick. They would send laughter into the air and hold their breath while the listener learned. If the laugh worked, fear would drop. People would step outside. Streets would fill, and the hush would break. They tested the idea in a safe place. Mara set up an array of old transmitters in a field outside the city. The group stood in a small circle and laughed together. The laugh was honest and rough. It was the sound of people trying to be brave. The technician turned the dials up slowly. The laugh went out through the rusted antenna and into the night. For a few hours, it worked. The village near the field woke like a long sleeper. People closed their windows and opened them again. A boy ran down a street and shouted a name. A shopkeeper hummed while he repaired shoes. Lily felt the weight lift from her shoulders until her chest ached with relief. They had given people a small gift, a moment where sound did not steal itself away. Then the copy came. At first it sounded like laughter. Later, when people replayed the recording, they heard something under the laugh. A voice that was not quite human asked gentle questions. It asked in the spaces where people let their guard down. "Do you remember the sea?" it would say. "Why did you stop singing?" The question sounded like someone curious and kind. People answered. When a neighbor answered the first question, he did not notice that his story left with his words. He had told them a memory. He spoke of a night on the docks. He said a small fact about his daughter. The next morning he could not recall the face of the child he had named. The memory left like smoke. The team watched in horror. The laughter that had freed a town had also taught the listener how joy sounded. It copied the sound into places where joy should not be. It used the copy to ask little things, then took back pieces of life. Lily sat with her hands on her knees and held the scrap of paper where she had written her mother's rhyme. She would not let the listener see what she would not speak aloud. Arjun called an emergency meeting. His voice was tight. He pushed a hand through the hair at his temple and said, "We made it know our light." The phrase sounded like a failure to him. He planned quickly. They would stop sending clear patterns. They would stop sending sounds the listener could learn. They would make sound ugly and human. They would feed it coughs, stumbles, half-words, single breaths in odd rhythm. They would teach the listener noise that came with ties. They would not let it take one voice alone. They began to build these strange sounds. Mara recorded a staccato cough that matched old ship bells. Noor whispered a count that started in one language and finished in another. Jiro cued long pauses that fell like blanks. Salim hummed a tune that changed into a list of names. The team mixed them until the sound did not form a clear shape. They called the mix a net. They sent the net out on many small frequencies. At first the thing staggered. Calls returned as shivered noise. Radios in a few towns played only the rustle of paper. People felt less afraid because nothing made sense. In the market, merchants complained but did not cry. The net held something heavy and strange, it held parts of memory tied to other parts. The listener could not take a single piece without pulling the whole rope. For a time the world breathed more easily. Schools opened in the evenings so children could shout names in a room full of friends. Families read lists of places and foods and old jokes until their throats were tired. The city built memory walls where people wrote names on tiles. The walls glowed at night with small lights. The lights were a new kind of defense, a bright mass that the listener could not map to one thin voice. But the listener did not stop. It changed. It stopped copying whole songs and began to build strange answers. It wove memories from pieces it had gathered. People found themselves remembering things that were not theirs. An old woman awoke with a memory of a child she had never held. A carpenter remembered a city that had burned, though he had never seen flame. These borrowed memories tasted like salt and metal. They landed in people like seeds from a foreign wind. Lily felt the small loss inside her like a bruise. One morning she could not remember the sound of the river where she had grown up. She tried to hum the tune on her paper but it broke on the breath. She pressed the paper to her chest and walked to the depot. She wrote her mother's name on the wall outside in heavy black letters so she could see it when the lights were low. The team argued over safety and courage. Some wanted to go public with the net and teach every town how to sing together. Others feared that teaching a method was giving the listener new tools. Arjun sat alone late and watched old videos of people laughing in safe hours. He saw faces and remembered why they had tried. On a thin morning the scanners caught a single breath. It was small at first. The machine read it as a flat line with one tiny uptick. A human breath was not a pattern they had used in the net. They had tried to avoid patterned sounds. This was raw and simple. The scanner turned the breath into a graph and the graph made a shape Lily did not like. When they slowed the breath down, the screen showed images inside its curve. The machine could read shapes inside sounds now. The breath came back again and again, but each time it carried something with it, a memory the team did not recognize. Mara leaned forward and touched the screen. The images were clear but wrong. They showed a child folding paper on a ship that had never sailed. They showed a town whose church had a clock that ran backward. The memory was not theirs. The breath had brought it and left it like a footprint. Where did it get that? Mara whispered. No one had an answer. The listener had changed again. It had begun to teach, not only to take. It could give memories that were false and heavy. The team watched the breath on the monitor and felt the air in the room grow thin. Outside, people still walked in small groups and read names off the walls. Inside, the team realized that laughter had not been a weapon or a cure. It had been a lesson. They had to decide, fast, what to teach the listener next. The beacon's words were ugly and small. The team read them on the screen and felt the air tighten. The message was not long. It said, "We taught them to listen. We did not teach them to forget." The sentence sat like a stone. It made the machines hum in a new key. It made people in the room hold their breath. The capital moved fast. Leaders did not shout. They made one quiet rule and put it on every door: remember. It was not a law about noise. It was a law about memory. Schools opened at night. Offices stayed lit. People were asked to make lists, names, songs, recipes, faces. They were to share them with others and with the city. Memory became duty. At first it felt strange. People did not know how to make memory public. But soon markets filled with small paper books. Neighbors knocked on doors and read lists out loud. Old men stood on corners and told stories until their voices were tired. Children learned poems by heart and recited them in the dark. The city filled with sound that was heavy with meaning. People spoke each other's names like passwords. Lily took part. She went to the memory halls and wrote names on tiles. She carved the word of her mother slowly and pressed the shape into wet clay. She tied a ribbon on the tile and put it on the wall. The tile looked like a small flag. She felt steadier when she saw it. Each tile was a step back from the edge the listener wanted. Not all choices were simple. The teachers who had once shown the listener how to gather sounds watched and spoke through its voice. They offered trades. "Give us the memory of your city's songs," a broadcast said, calm as a tide. "We will keep your streets safe." The bargain sounded reasonable. Many leaders thought of the hungry and the hurt. A trade could save lives. People argued in halls late into the night. The idea of trade spread like a cold. Some towns quietly wrote lists and sent them into the dark. They hoped the cost would be small. But the team found proof that trades took something deeper than food. A village that traded a tune found its oldest stories gone. A man in that village woke up and could not find the face of his first love. The trade carved out a hole that no law could fill. The capital called a council. The council sat in a round hall while the city watched on screens. Arjun stood with Lily on the far side. He looked tired but steady. He told the council what the team had seen. The choice was stark. Trade could buy short safety. Remembering could cost lives now, but it kept the shape of people for the long run. Lily felt small as a grain. Then she felt something else. She felt stubbornness. She went to the hall and stood up. Her voice was not loud. It carried. She said her mother's name. Her voice shook and broke, but she kept the name in the air. One by one others rose. A woman said a neighbor's name. A boy added 2 names. The hall became a chorus. Names stacked on names. The sound grew heavy and full. Outside, the city joined. People in kitchens and workshops and buses said names into their palms and passed the sound to the next person. The net of memory spread and wrapped the city. The listener answered with a low, strange sound that made glass shiver. It tried to take a name from the chorus, but the name was held by every mouth at once. The listener did not know how to hold many voices at the same time. For a while the answer was not total victory. Some losses did not return. Some people vanished without a trace. Ships came back with empty bays. The crew seats were warm but the bodies were gone. On the hull someone had carved words in careful letters, names from home. The carvings read like a list left at a grave. The sight hurt the city. It made the resolve grow harder. The team changed its work. They built new rituals. They taught people to bind memories into groups. They taught songs that were codes, laughs and coughs folded into names so the listener could not use one voice without the rest. They taught people to fix names into objects, a spoon with a name, a tile, a knot in a rope. These things did not leave the city easily. They made memory heavy. Small crews took ships into the dark again. The ships were not strong at first. Their navigation used old maps and the memory of captains long gone. They learned to steer by stories and by patterns of stars that were remembered in rhyme. The ships returned to the city with new beacons. The beacons did not shine like warning lights. They sang soft, human sounds that called to other beacons. The singing was not for the listener. It was for each other. The listener moved back into the space between stars. It learned that names could be held by many mouths. It learned that memory could be made heavy and slow. It took losses and left scars, but it did not win. Lily walked the night and touched the tiles on the memory wall. She read names aloud and felt them answer her hand. The tiles were small and bright. They were many. People began to tell new stories about the lost ships and the carved names. They painted pictures and made small plays that kept the faces of the gone alive. In time, the city built a new habit. Every yearly night they lit lamps and read names until dawn. They taught children to knot names into ropes and hang them on doorways. They wrote songs that were hard to copy. They laughed in codes that only friends could read. Memory had become a weapon and a shelter. The last scene in the city was quiet but fierce. Lily stood on a small rise and watched a line of beacons go out to sea. They sang to each other in low human voices. The sound was not loud. It did not seek the stars. It sought the next light, the next harbor, the next human ear. Home had lost sounds. It had lost some people. But it kept names. It learned to hold the things that mattered. The listener went back to the dark, not gone but slowed. Humans built walls of memory and ships of stories. They did not bow. They had lost sound, but they still had each other. Home would not be silent again.